the real issue of finding out whether or not you could, whether the engineering and seismic issues would allow a raising of the dam to be done, have to await all these other studies. And we don't even know if it's technically feasible. So Redwood Valley is no longer participating. They're unable to pay their share. So Dave Doak reported that that's the most expensive part of the study. It's going to cost $2 million to do basically the geotechnical study. $2 million, of which we would be responsible for half. We being the members of the IWPC. They said we need to convince Mike Thompson to get on board and really push this because the funds are dribbling out of Washington. They don't even know if they can get $100,000 out of Washington for the next fiscal year. Before we go on to the cost-sharing agreement, again, I found it quite pessimistic, the report from the Army Corps of Engineers. And I don't see, Sean White is not here yet. I don't know if he's going to arrive. Are there any questions or discussion at this point on the city's involvement in the feasibility study for the Lake Mendocino project?
A couple of remarks. I believe there's another alternative, which is to revise the operational procedures, the operational regimen for the dam, for the operation of the lake, and the classification of the water. Because there's a portion of the water that's flood pool and a portion that's conservation pool. And we have, through Russian River Flood Control, a small share of that conservation pool. And we have no right or control, nor does Sonoma County, to what is considered to be the flood pool. By changing their operational classifications and regimens, without increasing the volume of the lake, more water could be available to the communities along the river. That's an opportunity that I think has a political component that if we had cooperation with the water purveyors along the entire river, that Thompson's office, Thompson has said that if you folks could get together and work together, I can support doing something, but I can't do anything for a single agency. That's, I believe, his position and has remained his position for some years. Some things that may change the dynamics. That matter that came before us months ago regarding the Eel River settlement that changes the flow regimen through Potter Valley. If that is approved in Washington, then that could change the nature of the project so that it is federally funded, taking that burden off of the local communities. Remember that the original construction of Lake Mendocino was one phase of a three-phase project that was identified approximately in 1949. And the dam was first filled in 1959. Those three phases were the construction of Lake Mendocino, as it is now, then the construction of Lake Sonoma, and then the increase in the storage capacity of Lake Mendocino. That was what was originally envisioned as the project. So there's an obligation, in my mind, and I think it's something that we should push for. There's an obligation on the part of the Army Corps to complete what they started over 50 years ago. And I think as long as we'll continue to pay the money, they'll continue to take it. But if we could get together with the rest of the folks along the river, I think we have a chance to get Mr. Thompson to bring some heat, to get us to where we were supposed to be, as established by the original project design and scope of over half a century ago. One of the things that was identified as a physical problem by the Army Corps was that the spillway width is not adequate for a major storm event. You may recall that. So there is a physical constraint. In order to do more containment would require an increase in the width of the spillway. Those were my points.
Okay, and then we'll come back to you later to see whether or not we should continue to invest city funds in the feasibility study. Councilmember Roden.
Well, I had never heard what you said before about changing the ratio of flood water and conservation water, and I wondered if that had ever been discussed at IWPC. I mean, that would be a much cheaper way to get more water out.
It hadn't been discussed at IWPC yet.
Because that seems like that should be,
Well-
reviewed before we put more money into a feasibility study to raise the dam.
If
Right.
I may, for instance,
Yes.
on that topic, the water flow report that we received from Russian River Flood Control a day or so ago spoke to the release at the dam being reduced to 20 CFS, 20 cubic foot per second, because of the additional water flowing into the river. So by the time it got down to the gauging station, the required amount at the gauging station, it was the correct amount going past that point. The operational regimen caused a 30 CFS release that, based upon the rainfall patterns they knew, could predict that the lake would go dry. And yet the release remained at 30 CFS. It's that sort of thing that I believe should be changed. Because if by changing the releases, by changing the category of how much is flood and how much is conservation, by being more proactive in how much water is retained, we let so much, or they let so much water out during the winter in anticipation of a normal rainfall to preserve and hold a normal flood quantity of water that doesn't appear to be in the cards. It's, how do we get a better model so that less of the water goes down the river, more of that water is available?
One of the issues is, and again, it goes back to the discussion from Mike Dillabaugh, the previous project manager, is I think the reason they weren't allowed to begin to retain more water earlier, as requested by the Sonoma County Water Agency, evidently there is a degree of insecurity about the spillways and the security of the dam. Because I believe they nixed the idea of retaining more water earlier. And the question is, are they nervous about the security and their ability to deal with a late flood? So if the Inland Water and Power Commission is asked to fund its 50% share of the feasibility study, the total for the city of Ukiah, dividing $3 million by 4, it would be $750,000 for our share. That's assuming that the feds will provide their share. Again, Dave Doak, the current project manager, seemed to me to be pessimistic. Now, Sean White, who still isn't here, he believes that, he used the phrase, despite the hedging of the representative of the Army Corps, he thinks the project is the only possible new storage that we will ever get in inland Mendocino County. He says it's really our only hope for added storage in this area. Councilmember Landis?
Well, I'm digesting that, but what I was wanting to ask